I'm going to be reading from Acts chapter 17, starting in verse 1. And when you got that, you can say so. Acts chapter 17, starting in verse 1. All right, I got a few more so's. I'll give it a little bit. All right, I got the so. All right, I got good. I'm good. We'll start, I promise. All right, starting in verse 1. I'll be reading from the NIV version. When Paul and his companions had passed through Amphipolis and Apollonia, they came to Thessalonica, where there was a Jewish synagogue. As was his custom, Paul went into the synagogue, and on 3 Sabbath days he reasoned with them from the scriptures, explaining and proving that the Messiah had to suffer and rise from the dead. This Jesus I am proclaiming to you is the Messiah, he said. Some of the Jews were persuaded and joined Paul and Silas, as did a large number of God-fearing Greeks and quite a few prominent women. But other Jews were jealous, so they rounded up some bad characters from the marketplace, formed a mob, and started a riot in the city. They rushed to Jason's house in search of Paul and Silas in order to bring them out to the crowd. But when they did not find them, they dragged Jason and some other believers before the city officials, shouting, "These men who have caused trouble all over have now come here, and Jason has welcomed them into his house. They are all defying Caesar's decrees, saying that there is another king, one called Jesus." When they heard this, the crowd and the city officials were thrown into turmoil. Then they made Jason and the others postpone and let them go. As soon as it was night, the believers sent Paul and Silas away to Berea. On arriving there, they went to the Jewish synagogue. Now the Berean Jews were of more noble character than those in Thessalonica, for they received the message with great eagerness and examined the scriptures every day to see if what Paul said was true. As a result, many of them believed, as also did a number of prominent Greek women and many Greek men. But when the Jews in Thessalonica learned that Paul was preaching the word of God at Berea, some of them went there too, agitating the crowds and stirring them up. The believers immediately sent Paul to the coast, but Silas and Timothy stayed at Berea. Those who escorted Paul brought him to Athens and then left with instructions for Silas and Timothy to join him as soon as possible. You can be seated. All right, so I'm going to give you guys a fair warning that this is going to be more of a college lecture than it is going to be a typical preaching. I have titled this Faith in Physics, and we are going through the Defending the Faith series here at Core Faith. And in this case, we will be defending the faith in a scientific society. So, some preface to this. Our world has become more and more scientific as we know it. Matter of fact, what you guys hold in your hands on a daily basis, how you communicate, how you make your lives look so amazing on social media, is all due to science, right? Discoveries, breakthroughs have led us to be amazing people, right? We are the tip top of our culture because of science. My issue with this from a Christian perspective, from a biblical worldview perspective, is that quite often we feel threatened, almost as if the Bible is not keeping up with science. Or if you're a scientist who's a Christian, you kind of like to push your science into the Bible and say, this is how I can explain the events that are happening in the Bible. And I've been in the scientific community. I'll go over who I am and kind of give you guys some of my credentials so you know where I'm coming from on this topic. But I have been in the scientific community defending the faith for quite some time now, and I can tell you that it was a very, very uphill battle for me, because every time I learned something new about science, I felt like what I knew about the Bible was not enough, or that I was disproving what I was taught. So as we go into this, it's going to start off like a lecture. So if you guys never been in a college lecture, welcome. This is your first one. I hope you guys enjoy it. I am going to be honest with you. I'm going to make this as non-technical as possible, but there will be some technicalities, and I will do my best to explain them. So before I kick in, I'm going to start with, if it works, I guess not. This turned off on me. All right, I'm giving verbal cues today. It worked first service just fine. I don't know what's going on. Oh, I got kicked out. All right, so, all right, here we go. Science, it does fail sometimes. All right, who am I? All right, my name is Jonathan Reyes. Some of you guys know me. Some of you guys don't know what I do. That's totally fine. You're about to find out. I have my bachelor's of science in aerospace engineering. I have my master's of science in thermal fluids. I also have a professional master's of applied physics. I have a doctor of philosophy in mechanical and aerospace sciences. After I finished my PhD, I went and became specialized. So I have a few specialties. I have a specialty in combustion physics, optical diagnostics, fluid science, thermodynamics, and technology transition. You don't need to know any of those for today, I promise. All right, I'm just kind of letting you know my background here. After my specialty, you're required to do some form of research before you can actually be accepted as a doctoral candidate. I did 3 years of fundamental research, and after 3 years of fundamental research, I moved to 5 years of applied research. So basically, fundamentals, you can think of it as like the foundation, right? All science is going to be described by these fundamentals. So when you're studying and researching fundamental science, you're actually looking for new foundations in science, or not new, but discovering foundations that we didn't know were there before to help us explain other things. And then I did 5 years of applied research, and basically I get those fundamentals. And in my case, I made missiles. I'm also an R&D, a research and development business owner, and a DoD contractor. So I also know that science makes very good money. So, why does that get a hand clap? All right, credentials, okay. All right, so that is who I am, and it's not necessarily important at all, but what I want you guys to get from who I am is that I'm coming from a place of being in science for a very long time and coming from a place of, a biblical worldview, and really just struggling and fighting with other people on how we should be interpreting things and, whether it's biblical or not. So before I jump into faith v. science, I think we all need to have a good grasp of the fundamentals, right? We're in church, we're Christians. We need to understand our own fundamentals so that when we are looking at science, and not just science, really just looking at anything, you can understand how you should be interpreting things, right? So, it jumped. I forgot. This doesn't work. So, next slide. Yeah. Science is going to be crazy second service, all right? Cool. Here we go. The fundamentals of Christianity. All right. I got 9 points for you. Point 1, inerrancy of scriptures. Scriptures cannot be wrong. 2, the virgin birth of Christ. 3, substitutionary atonement of Christ. And when I say that, just make it not sound so technical. Basically, we're sinners. We can't save ourselves, right? Therefore, Christ had to die for us. He was our substitution for our wrath. The bodily resurrection of Christ. One Trinitarian God. Justification by faith. Basically, we can experience forgiveness, repent, and have relationship with God. There is life after death. We are eternal beings. Communion of the saints. I am not Christianity. We are the body of Christ. And number 9, and this is where a lot of debate comes in, authenticity of recorded miracles. Basically, whether or not these things actually happen. And you'll see, I'm going to draw some parallels between the scientific community and the Christian community. But on each and every single one of these points, believe it or not, the church has split. It is split on the inerrancy of Scripture. We have what we call liberal Christians and fundamentalists. I can tell you right now, I'm a fundamentalist. Bishop is also a fundamentalist, if you didn't know. Real quick, a difference between the two. A fundamentalist really believes that the Scriptures are inerrant, right? That if there's something that we don't understand about the Scriptures, is because we just don't get it yet, right? We need to keep looking more into it. Whereas a liberal person would say, I don't really understand what's going on there. I'm going to go out here and grab what I need to sort of explain what's going on, whether it actually stays within the context of the Bible or not, right? The virgin birth of Christ, tons of splits there. The list goes on, right? And each and every single one of these, there is some denominational split or major schism in the church. And we're, even amongst Christians, we have issues with these. But these are the fundamentals. So when it comes to defending your faith in a society of science, you have to understand that as a Christian, this is where you stand. The next one, fundamentals of science. Science, I believe in science. Because I do. Science is systematic. It has to be repeatable. It must be complicit, not a priori. All right? When I say complicit, basically science must agree with prior discoveries. And if it disagrees with prior discoveries, it must provide sufficient data to prove that the original interpretation was false. Now, when I say not a priori, basically, when I say something is a priori, it's basically me reading into the Scriptures, but in a scientific sense. So evolution, let's take that, right? We call it a theory. Why do we call it a theory? Because we have not yet observed it or been able to prove it experimentally. Now, using the fundamentals of science, which is indeed true, I can sort of jump to conclusions and say, well, this is probably how it happened. But I'm not being scientific, right? Evolution is not scientific. It is basing itself on true science, but it itself is a priori. It's not scientific in nature. So, science must also be objective, which means there can be no bias in science. And as many of you know, there is plenty of bias because science makes money. And number 5, fundamentally universal. Basically, 1 + 1 = 2 here, on Mars, and at the end of the universe, right? Now, if you ask some theorists or advanced mathematicians, they will tell you that depending on where you are, where time has warped and space has dark matter and gravity has different effects, 1 + 1 might actually equal 1.82. But again, that is a theory, right? 1 + 1 still equals 2. Now, I said I was going to draw some parallelisms between science and Christianity, right? On these fundamentals, believe it or not, there is an insane amount of discourse in the scientific community. Because as I stand from an evolutionist standpoint, right, I want my theory to be true. Therefore, I want my theory to be scientific. So I will present my thesis, I will present my argument on the basis that it is scientifically proven, when in reality it is not. And scientists disagree and butt heads all the time, not just on evolution, but on simple things like how an electron from your, CPU on a cell phone actually moves through the entire system and makes your cell phone work, right? I mean, your cell phone works. Here's another thing. We barely know how we fly, all right? And I work in this, all right? This is what I do for a living, and we don't even know how it works. To be honest, we know, as a physicist, we know about 10% of the fundamental sciences required to explain combustion physics and flight. 10% is what we estimate. So, and flying is the safest thing we got, believe it or not, right? And the reason why is because every time we make a new fundamental discovery, it's always interpreted differently, and it's always subject to interpretation. So the scientific community is always fighting, even at the fundamental level. Same way the body of Christ fights on the fundamentals. All right, next slide. Oh, it's already up there. I didn't see it change, so I was like looking at it. Is the Bible scientific? I'm going to give you the short answer. No. I'm going to make it real simple. Before we can even begin to answer this question, we first have to know how to interpret. Now, no one in here is going to be taking a theology class or anything, but I kind of want to run through these and why they're important. Hermeneutics is the principles and methodology of biblical interpretation. Forms of this interpretation are literal, moral, allegorical, anagogical, and eisegetical. All right? I'm going to explain those for you, I promise. Literal interpretation is basically exactly what it means. Biblical text is to be interpreted according to the plain meaning conveyed by its grammatical construction and historical context. Moral interpretation is where we start to step into what we call exegesis, or reading out of the scriptures. Basically, you take your literal reading and you use that on how that it can apply to a true moral compass. You're not putting anything into the scriptures, you're letting the scriptures read out to you. It's extremely important. The next one is allegorical interpretation. Here we kind of step into what we call prophecies and things like that, but basically a good sort of example for this is events in the Old Testament that foreshadow what happens in the New Testament. Anagogical, and this is kind of where science plays a role here. Anagogical can be summarized as mystical interpretation. Now, typically this is used to sort of like talk about what the afterlife is like, and this, again, you can do this exegetically, or you can basically read out of the scriptures here and stay within the context. But science tends to actually live right there when it comes to the Bible. And this is where things kind of get flipped, was when we get to something what we call eisegetical, which is reading into the scriptures. I use this example in first service. Basically, an eisegetical, let's say, preaching would be, I don't like Aldo's gray shoes, right? And because I don't like Aldo's gray shoes, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start searching the scriptures for anything that tells me that the color gray is of the devil, right? Then I'm going to come up here and I'm going to start preaching about the color gray. And I'm going to throw scriptures at you. I'm going to throw articles at you. I'm going to throw science at you. I'm going to throw everything at you so that you believe that the color gray is bad and that Aldo is a heretic. But that is, he took off his shoes. I'm sorry, I wasn't being serious. But basically, science suffers from the same problem, right? Science has an insane amount of eisegetical interpretations. Because whenever we discover something new, the first thing we try and do as scientists is, we want to be heroes. We save the world, right? We take out this discovery and figure out exactly what it means, an implication for a global event. Same thing happened with COVID-19. When COVID-19 hit, everyone was studying COVID-19. Everyone was the authority on what COVID-19 could do. Everybody was the authority. You know what they all had? The same fundamental science that everybody else had. But somehow, sneezes went 20 feet. The COVID virus could last 18 weeks on a piece of metal. And then, 2 weeks later, it could only last a week. COVID could survive in the heat, but not the cold. And then all of a sudden, COVID could survive in the cold, not the heat. Same science, different interpretations, right? So it's really, really important to understand this and how you interpret it. But above all else, what you need to know about the Bible is that it reveals Christ, not science. Now, I'm not saying the Bible doesn't contain scientific facts, but that's not the goal of the Bible. If the Bible was scientific, then Dr. Seuss's Green Eggs and Ham is also scientific. And I can fight that argument all day, and I can make it sound like Green Eggs and Ham, believe it or not, was explaining the amazing psyche of changing a human from one concept to another in a scientific approach. But in reality, that's not what it is. It's a children's book, right? The Bible reveals Christ. And what happens is when you try and put science into the Bible, you're trying to bring the Bible to the world. You're trying to bring the Bible to science, when in reality, it's not a scientific book. Moses, Paul, the apostles, I guarantee you they did not know the Pythagorean theorem. Maybe they did, but they're not scientists, nor do they prove to be scientists. And a lot of people like to pull from Job and all these scientific facts about the stars and all this stuff. Job wasn't a scientist. Job was just a regular man trying to worship God and struggling through all life, like the rest of us. And the reason why this also becomes another problem is that if the Bible was a scientific textbook, everyone in this room is living as a heretic, because none of you guys know anything about science, unless everyone in here has a PhD. This science that we have now didn't exist back then, but yet the Bible has to remain the same. God remains the same yesterday, today, and forever. So there may be scientific facts, but ultimately the Bible is not scientific. And if you try and approach it that way, you're going to get beat every single time. And I will be the one doing the beating. So let's flip the script, if I can get the next one. Is science biblical? All right? Again, we're going to start the same way. Before you can answer, you must first know how to interpret science. Science, and I'm not announcing my points. I am so sorry. I skipped my first point, which was the last one. And the last one is, point one is the Bible is biblical. I think that's pretty simple, right? Point two, science is, can you guess? Scientific. Oh man, you guys are great. I'm gonna get you all PhDs. Science is a belief of absolutes, not theories, right? We must first understand that science is a method that provides truth that satisfies the fundamental laws of nature and physics. To believe in science is not necessarily to believe in evolution or the Big Bang, but to believe that the scientific method provides universal truth that explains the world around us. Evolution and Big Bang have not truly been observed experimentally, proven, and thus are not actually scientific, though they may use science for their basis. Science is always going to be about absolutes, the scientific method, right? What is it? Observation, deduction, hypothesis. And then from there, you step up and you'll start to make all of your theories, right? But observation, deduction, experimentation, and from there you make a hypothesis. That's it. You observe, and what you observe and can repeat is therefore true. Anything outside of that technically is not science. Science is a tool for explanation. From a non-biblical worldview, basically from a non-Christian perspective, science can be and is used to explain the events of the Bible with increasing accuracy. And where it fails, science does not yet exist to explain, or they leave it up to an author's over-exaggeration to drive a point home. Basically, from a non-Christian perspective, scientists who actually look at the events in the Bible will say, this is where science makes sense, and where it doesn't, we probably just don't know it yet, or the author is just being very dramatic to make a point. Also, from a non-biblical worldview, we are bound by the laws of physics. But what we cannot explain, we must decide for ourselves. From a Christian perspective, you are also bound by the laws of physics. But from a Christian perspective, God is the creator of what? Physics. He's the creator of the world, which means he's not bound by the laws of what? Physics. So here's where we get to the point of authenticity of miracles. As much as I want to pump science into these things and say, this is how it can happen, and I can explain to you how it's actually possible to walk on water, right? You ever seen those water bugs? That what they do is actually, if you go down microscopically, their legs are moving at an insane rate. And what that does, it vibrates the water and creates a surface tension, which allows them to float over it, right? So when we look at Jesus walking over the water, what happened? There was an insane storm. And you have all these waters rushing and all this stuff. And technically, if the condition is right, Jesus could walk on that water if it was moving fast enough, because the viscosity condition has been satisfied. Now, I can say that all day, every day, right? But even if that is true, the fact that that condition happened itself is a miracle. But who's to say, that God is not above physics? Why would I remove the amazingness? Why would I remove and take glory from God in that aspect? Sure, I can try and explain it scientifically, but ultimately, God is awesome. And he showed the apostles that he is above the laws of nature that govern this sinful world. My next point, science is not morality. And I don't care who you are, science will never lead you to morals. Let me give you a very exaggerative example of this. I cannot say as a scientist that murder is bad scientifically. What I can tell you is that committing murder can cause some mental stress. Scientifically, that's proven. Lying can also cause some psychological changes as well. That is also statistically and scientifically proven. But I can't tell you that lying is bad scientifically. I can't tell you that murder is bad. I can only explain what's going on. And that's the problem with a lot of people who only rely on science, or even rely on science to interpret the Bible, is that they have no moral ground. When you leave science as the only, end all, be all truth, we can do whatever we want. I can interpret that whichever way, and it'll always be scientifically accurate because I can spin it no matter what. Science is not morality. Which brings me to my last point. Science itself reveals absolute truth as it pertains to natural phenomena. It does not reveal biblical truth. Now, a lot of people sort of feel uneasy about that. They're like, oh, no, but science can explain some things we have in the Bible. Oh, yes, it does. But the people in the past, our ancient cultures, they didn't have science the way we do. But they didn't need that to explain the truth or reveal the truth to them. When you read the Bible, who is truth? Christ. And what is the Bible all about? Revealing who? Christ. And what did we just figure out? That the Bible is what? Not scientific. Now, what science can do is really help you discover the intricacies and the amazingness of who God is. He allows us to explore his creation, his complex, amazingly divine, knit together laws of physics to make our world what it is today. We can reach people that we haven't reached before. We can go places that we haven't gone to before. We can survive in places that we haven't survived before because of science. And God uses that. But it itself does not reveal truth. It by itself cannot lead you to Christ. So, my third point, next slide. Faith versus physics. And my third point is faith does not combat science. And here is where things begin to sort of shift, right? Because typically that's what we do as Christians, right? We see science as an attack. We see new breakthrough science as some form of just crushing of the Christianity beliefs. Everything we know has now been lost because they found some new gene somewhere. Oh, we finally discovered that we can go wherever we want. We can do whatever we want, right? We can make it to Mars. We're not bound by these laws. But in reality, between science and Christianity, when you look at their definitions, there really is no tension, right? What did we say science was? It's just the unbiased observation of the natural world around us, or an unbiased view at the amazing intricacies of God, right? But it itself, science by definition, is not in combat with faith. It seeks to explain, not faith, but it seeks to explain the amazingness of God. Faith itself is also not in combat against science. Why would we be against something that's true? The laws around us, the things that govern us, the thing that allows us to breathe, the way our breath interacts with the plant life around us to keep us alive. I mean, that's just amazing. Why would I deny that and say science is just wrong? It's the reason why I breathe. It's how God created things to be. In reality, it's not in combat. So it's not faith versus physics. It's faith and physics. From the Christian perspective, science exists as a supplement to discover more of God's glory, and it is not to be ignored. Ignoring scientific discoveries will lead to a prideful outlook instead of a humble mindset that continually searches God's word. The last thing is the science. Oh, no, still one more. Go back. Don't move forward on me yet. Yes, cool. The science that we actually defend against is eisegetical interpretation, right? The stuff that we feel like is attacking Christianity, the stuff that we feel like is hurting us and trying to destroy our faith. Really, when you get down into the thick of it, it is just an eisegetical interpretation of the fundamental laws of science. That is it. Evolution, Big Bang, all these different genes they keep finding that cause us to think the way we do. I mean, it's really, in the end, if you understand how to interpret and you know your fundamentals, we're not in combat. My last point number 4, now we can move forward. Thank you. Truth requires a response. I actually think that's on here. I did not plan that, by the way. When I was writing this, but then I noticed it after first service when I was sitting back there. I was like, oh, snap, I forgot that was up there. Proof. Proof. If you can prove it to me, I'll believe you. If you can show me that God is real, I'll be a Christian. Thomas, show me the holes in his hands and in his feet, and I'll believe that he is risen. Proof. Well, let me start off with proof does not equate to belief. And anyone who thinks it does, you're mistaken, because there is no such thing as undeniable proof. It doesn't exist, because any proof you bring my way, no matter how true it is, I can still deny it because I just don't want to believe in it. But proof is necessary. And ultimately, it's a building block on faith. Without historical evidence and quantifiable proof the Bible is accurate, we cannot hold the world accountable to the truth of Christ. Right? And you'll hear this, a lot of arguments from no matter what area, whether it's atheism or people who just believe in science or other religions, right? You Christians and your blind faith. I'm going to be honest, I have yet to meet a Christian who has blind faith. And if you do have blind faith, you were born with faith. That's the only way, because when you're born, you absolutely have zero conception of the world around you. Nothing is there. But as you are raised, as you go through life, you are a little scientist. Everything you do is an experiment. The first time you try hot sauce when you're 3 years old, that's your experiment. Not going to do this again. The first time you decide to make the mistake of cursing your mom out and she puts a soap in your mouth, that was my first experiment. I would never do that again. Right? Everything you do in life are these tiny little experiments. You do one thing, you get a result, and you realize, okay, this is good, this is bad, and you keep moving on. And ultimately, when it comes to faith and that decision to completely trust, right? And here's where the blind faith part comes in. And this is where I feel there's a lot of misinterpretation. You come to a point where you may not have all of the proof. You may not be able to explain everything, but what you know and what you've heard is true. Therefore, you completely trust it and will dedicate your life to the relationship with Christ and the seeking of his word. And even though you didn't have the total proof then, you seek it and you seek it and you seek it. But there was a moment where you said, I completely trust this. Nothing can sway me. It wasn't blind. You may not have had all the answers, but there was a point where it became complete trust for you. That is faith. Proof is necessary. If I believed the tooth fairy was real, right? Let's say I believe the tooth fairy is real, but I have no proof of the tooth fairy and the fact that it may or may not exist. Well, if you decide not to believe in the tooth fairy, I can't really hold you accountable to that, can I? Because I have no proof. But if I did have proof of the tooth fairy and that it actually existed, then it's your fault for not believing, and I get to take all of your quarters. Right? You can give me your teeth, I'll put it under my pillow. That's disgusting. I'm not going to say that again. Don't do that. You can keep your teeth. You can keep your quarters too. Proof is necessary. Without it, we can't hold the world accountable. We know what Christ did. We know where he walked. We know his words. They're recorded. There are plenty of eyewitness accounts to this. There is absolute proof there. You can deny it if you want, but that's how we hold the world accountable. That's how, and don't take this the wrong way. I'm not saying everyone, we as Christians get to judge everything, but that's how we become judges because we have the proof and we get to hold people accountable. We do it out of love. We're not the ultimate judge. But we get to hold the world accountable because there is proof. Secondly, proof requires humility. As I was reading through Acts, right, what do you see? You literally see two examples. See Thessalonica, and they're straight out like, get Saul out of here. Get Paul out of here. Then you see the Bereans, and they're like, whoa, wait a minute. This is some weird stuff you're saying right here. I'm going to look into this. And after looking into it, what did they find? The proof was true. Right? And I didn't read this part, but then what is he after that, he goes to Athens, right? And in Athens, he's disgusted by all these idols that he sees, but he still decides to preach Christ, right? And all of a sudden, these guys, these mathematicians of their day, this is the scientific community of the day, the top of the culture, they say, oh, this is very interesting. We've never heard something like this before. We'd like to hear you on this topic more. Humility. Without humility, proof really doesn't go anywhere. And I'm not just talking about acceptance. I'm also talking about delivery. Because here's my problem with Christians in science sometimes. They want to stand on the podium and say, we are right. Which is true. I mean, we're right. We are. But we want to stand on the podium and say, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. This is why your religion don't make sense. This is why you don't make sense. This is why you don't make sense. And science, you can just go out the door because we really don't need you. We're right. We got it all figured out. Why are we coming from that place of pride? If we deliver proof in a humble manner, Paul went to the Greeks and pretty much looked at all their gods and said, hey, wait a minute, you got this God here that doesn't even have a name. Let me help you explain what's going on here. He studied their culture. He wasn't the expert in it, but that's what he did. And that's our problem, is that we stand up here, say we are right, and no one wants to listen to us. Because to be honest, sometimes we don't even want to listen as Christians. And truth, like I said, requires a response. No matter what, once truth is presented, whether you did it out of pride or whether you did it out of humility the way you were supposed to. Truth requires a response, whether it's good or bad. The individual is responsible for what they've heard. Same thing goes for us. So, I'm going to bring this all back into picture now. I didn't tell you guys anything about some crazy mathematics that can prove that God is true. I didn't tell you anything about some amazing physics that really define how the Bible came together. I didn't give you any scientific evidence as to how every single word in the Bible is the actual inerrant word of Christ, right? I didn't give you any of that information. And to be honest, even if I did, it wouldn't matter. Because not everyone in here is a scientist. Some of you guys, you're doctors. Some of you guys, you might be working at a grocery store. I don't know what your careers are. But I can tell you what. Those who are continually seeking Christ will be prepared. Can I get the next slide? This is my driving point home here. Everything about Christianity, everything what we do external out to the world is about revealing Christ. That is our ultimate mission. But we must be in constant preparation for that mission. You don't get to be lazy. You know why? Science wasn't lazy, and look where we're all at right now. Because to be honest, if science wasn't doing what it's doing, these walls wouldn't be made out of the way they are, the wood. There'd be like little holes up there and some cuts so that the wind can blow through, so we all wouldn't be sweating up in here, right? We've advanced quite a bit. But science ain't taking it easy. We must be in constant preparation. It doesn't matter if you're not a scientist. It doesn't matter if you're not a doctor, if you understand medicine. It absolutely does not matter. You don't need to know Latin. You don't need to know Greek, even though sometimes on a Sunday you might hear a Greek word or two from Bishop, right? You don't need it. Why? You look back at our ancient culture, they couldn't even read, yet they understood biblical truth. Even for them, without the knowledge, they could understand truth. And what were they doing? They were in constant communion. They were constantly seeking Christ. When it came time to defend, they did it from a place of meekness, from a place of love to reveal Christ. But if you're not in constant preparation, the next scientific breakthrough, the next religion that pops up, the next political law or debate that comes through is all going to knock your religion and your belief for a loop, right? Every single time. Which will then bring up the question, do you really completely trust what you believe in? Okay. All right, my closing questions. Are your interpretations, and when I say interpretations, I mean about anything. Yes, of course, the Bible, but even interpretations when it comes to science, when it comes to religion, when it comes to anything, are they grounded in the meekness of Christ? Because if they're not, you're really reading into it instead of reading out of it. Second, are you in constant preparation? Because if you're not, to be honest, you'll just be thrown for a loop and you'll just be along for the ride, whatever that ride is, and you'll just be going with the flow. And to be honest, when you're going with the flow, science will tend to make more sense. So will some other religions, because it just makes things easier for you, makes you more comfortable. So those are my two closing questions. That is it. You have all graduated. Give yourselves a hand clap. You made it through your first college lecture with Professor Reyes.
Thank you for joining us. We hope you were blessed, encouraged, and challenged to walk out your faith this week. If you would like to give to support our ministry, you can in the following ways. Thank you for the ways you support us. God bless, and we hope to see you next Sunday.